All right. So, hello and welcome. My name is Samuel Ray, and with me is my co-host,
Five Prime.
Yep, and this is CounterPick New Perspectives. This is our main feature episode for the month of April. Better late than never, but we figured we would do it live to make it like a little special treat. So today we are talking about the topic of depth in gameplay and in game design. Since Sai and I both played so many games across, 20, well, for you, Sai, it was like your whole life pretty much, minus maybe 3 years.
Yeah, that's, it's about 20 years, dude.
Yeah, okay, so about 20 years for you, 21, something like that. And for me, it was more than 20 years. Nearing 30 years at this point. So, yeah, we played a lot of games. And we started with Sega Genesis, back when the gameplay was pretty much all the games had, as well as, it was the arcade era still, it was the transition from the arcades to the home. So gameplay was the core of games. Stories didn't really come until later with RPGs and stuff.
Yeah, I guess we're just getting right into it with that, because, the arcade blood of old time video games kind of precluded the fact that you couldn't really have a progression system in any game because there was no way for you to have a save file. So that's I think an important thing to note about the lack of depth near the beginning of video game history, because the save files didn't really start happening until home consoles.
Well, I wouldn't say that games had a lack of depth. Back in when they, because depth kind of came with more buttons on your controllers too. Back in the Atari, it was a joystick and a button at most. And if you think about Pong, it was just the dial, just moving the paddles.
There's also some of them weird consoles like the Intellivision that had like that
phone,
TV remote control
or TV remote
with the knob and like 9, 10 number buttons and like some other stuff.
Yeah, that was a bit too much.
Buttons, but it wasn't good.
Yeah, that was way too much.
So it might be broad strokes to say that old controllers didn't have that many buttons, but
True.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, the game design didn't catch up to multi-button controllers for a while though. But what I was saying,
Game Boy only had A and B.
Yeah, what I was saying was that back in the old days, gameplay depth was pretty much all they had. Since you had to start from the beginning, you were getting better at the games every time you played, and they had to have depth for you to actually get better and have a reason to replay the same game over and over from level 1. Especially back in the arcades when you were putting quarters into play every time. Because mastery was the arcade.
Let me amend what I said then, because I just realized as you said that, I think there is something that needs to be said to start off with to delineate depth and complexity.
Yep, and that's actually one of the things we like talking about on this topic.
Something simple can be deep.
Yep.
And something complex could be shallow, although I think that's less common.
Yeah. So the way I like to put it, it's to define depth, right? Because to start on the discussion, you should really define it. Sometimes we don't do that right off the bat because we already kind of have a shared definition, or we've already established it in previous conversation. But depth and complexity are not synonymous. They are not the same meaning. Complexity is how many moving parts there are, and oftentimes complexity means it's more difficult to learn. Depth means the depth of a game is basically the extent to which players can master it, if that makes sense. Like the level of mastery capable for players, available to players, that what they call that skill ceiling. Basically, when a game has no depth, you pretty much figure it out so fast that there's not much else to sink your teeth into. When a game is complex, usually complex games have a lot of depth, but it's also really hard to just get in at ground floor. So you can have depth without complexity, but complexity almost always gives a game depth, but then makes it kind of unapproachable. So
okay, but so
depth is mastery, or potential for mastery.
Yeah, but as I said, since at first there was no like save file system, right? Mm-hmm. That progression systems kind of came later, at least more in-depth progression systems. So using Sonic as an example, as we tend to do,
Being our
what
first
you
game
have-
and all.
Yeah, you start with all of the techniques that you will have in the game. The only progression that there is in a Genesis Sonic game is getting the Chaos Emeralds. That's it. So it isn't really complicated, and I think we have an ad.
Oh, just keep going.
An ad came up for me. Okay.
Don't worry, just keep going as normal.
So, like, the only thing you have, I mean, we're kind of skipping Sonic 1 because, you know,
Yeah.
in Sonic 2, the only thing you have, you have the spin dash, and then you can collect Chaos Emeralds. And
the physics engine.
Rolling into a spin.
Yeah.
And yeah,
That's where the depth came from, actually. It was the physics engine that gave the game its depth, because players could make use of those basic skills that you have access to from the very beginning to really amp up their platforming and like gain access to new areas of levels and stuff, and techniques to speed run through stages.
Also, this might be crossing into another topic a little bit, but I'm not sure where to count like glitches and exploits with regard to depth, because it's not part of the design.
Yeah, it depends on its relation to the design, why the glitches or exploits exists, right?
Well, for instance, in Sega Genesis Sonic games, in like speed runs, you have stuff like screen wraps, horizontal wraps, vertical wraps,
right?
That can like.
I guess we're talking more about game design rather than unintended elements.
Yeah, I thought so. I just wanted to that's a footnote.
Yeah, I think that'll be our main thing on that. Is we're solely talking about game design, meaning the developers intended what they've put into the game rather than what players broke the system to be able to do. So
well, okay, maybe glitches don't count, but I'm still on the fence about exploits.
Yeah, it depends. An exploit by definition, I think, is when you exploit a hole, a shortcoming in the programming to do something that wasn't intended. Advanced techniques.
The preeminent example of an exploit in gaming, to me, is wave dashing in Super Smash Bros. Melee. It's not a glitch, but it does add depth to the gameplay.
That's true. The developers didn't intend it, but they also, when they discovered it, they didn't remove it either. So that's a unique case, I would say. But I think, because Len, if you take an example where the developers intended it to be in the game, let's take Tekken, right? Wave dashing is part of the Mishima design. And so therefore, and then some other characters can do a crouch dash, right? They just can't do it repeatedly like a wave dash. That's exclusive to the Mishimas. So that's intended by developers and adds a level of depth, but also kind of complexity to the Mishimas that enables them to be played to such a high level that kind of, it is Tekken, right? It's high level Tekken.
Yeah.
But so that's a form of depth and I wouldn't call it an exploit because it was intended by the developers. They put it into the game on purpose.
Absolutely not an exploit.
Yeah.
It's in the move list.
Yeah, so I think if it's put in the game by the developers on purpose, it's not an exploit. An exploit is when you exploit a shortcoming in the programming to do something that wasn't intended. I think that's the actual definition.
But like melee wave dashing wasn't intentional, but it's also not a glitch because it's just a consequence of the engine working as intended.
Yeah, the wave dash in Melee is an exploit because you're using the physics engine in a way that wasn't intended. You're dashing, air dodging down towards the ground and sliding to keep that initial burst of momentum.
So that's a little bit of a gray area as to what we're talking about. Like, I think it kind of counts. But going back to like early video games, right? Arcade experiences, like, sometimes they were very simple. Like, can you really say like a beat 'em up like Streets of Rage has much depth to it?
Yeah,
you punch, you kick, you jump and you kick, and you can grab and throw.
Yeah,
and
many would say in those early beat 'em ups, there was a very hard limit to the extent of mastery that you can have. It was more about kind of memorizing where enemies would come at you from, and like the mastery, the depth came from like positioning, not getting surrounded by enemies and stuff like that. Using environmental options. There was depth, but there wasn't a whole lot. No.
Yeah. So you say that like arcade games, all they had really was the depth of gameplay. That's not entirely true, because there are
That's
other
true.
design features that can make an arcade experience entertaining.
Yep. Real quick, I want to shout out Cephalon Like there. Good to see you here. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. We're doing it live this time. So we're not going to be reacting to chat quite as much as usual, but feel free to chime in on the topic of gameplay depth in game design. So but yeah, so like you were saying, I see what you mean. Not all that they had in the arcades was depth, but depth was a big draw to people to come back and play a game repeatedly and spend their quarters, right?
Yeah, and if I'm to jump forward in time again for a second, what beat 'em ups like Streets of Rage also reminds me of is something a little more modern, which is the what are they called? Dynasty Warriors games.
Oh yeah, basically 3D beat 'em ups.
They're very similar league games where you just mow down groups of weak enemies and then come up to one stronger enemy, and that's it. And it's not really like any depth that you could say there is basically in positioning, because you just have to avoid the boss enemies attacks, and then mash one button to combo. Like, that's it.
Yeah, no, they definitely do. To me, anyway, they've always felt kind of shallow, and they're definitely good for like turn brain off and enjoy being OP kind of games. Except when freaking Lu Bu came into the scene, then you had to run. But that was on purpose. He was supposed to be a daunting opponent, an unbeatable opponent until you get to the end of the campaign. But yeah, it's like I get you there. The Dynasty Wars really was the next step of the beat 'em up into the 3D space. Really, that is the purest 3D beat 'em up, I would say. And yeah, they're not the most complex games. Honestly, for them, they try to give the game a bit of depth in the form of like the RPG mechanics, right? The leveling up of your characters and unlocking of new combo trees, branches or whatever, to give you a little bit more to do. But yeah, it's not a very deep series.
And like finding what character you like the look of what they do the most,
Pretty much, because they all play the same. Yeah, they just, their attacks have some slightly different properties.
Experience in games like Dynasty Warriors Gundam as well, and what I've seen of whatever the Zelda one and the Fire Emblem.
Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So, but what I was saying about save files though is that throughout that whole arcade era, basically, that was before save files started being more commonplace. So a more long form of progression was not possible until save files started coming in more commonplace use.
For sure.
Then you can, and progression systems very much can add to depth. I mean, look at Devil May Cry, for instance, getting all of the different weapons and techniques, skills, and any character action game like that.
Yeah,
it tends to have skill trees like that, where it adds to the things that you can do in combat.
For sure. And honestly, those games have a wealth of depth, but I think this also comes from kind of the complexity, because you start off simple, but then eventually there's so many different things you can do in those games that it's just crazy. But they ramp it up. They ramp it up, right? They gradually ramp it up for you.
How about a more simple version of that, then, I would say? X-Men. What was the one before Marvel Ultimate Alliance? X-Men
Legends.
X-Men Legends. Yeah, the different combos that you unlocked.
Yeah, that was
got, the ground slam or pop up or whatnot.
Yeah, those were what do you call it? Those were that action RPG, Diablo style action RPG kind of game. Yeah. Like that, Path of Exile and so on, but X-Men.
Those are kind of like a mid ground, I would say, between something like Dynasty Warriors and a character action game.
So that actually makes me think of something interesting, because oftentimes when a game's core gameplay is relatively simple, like your Dynasty Warriors, like your overhead isometric action RPGs, like you mentioned with X-Men Legends, oftentimes it doesn't become much more complex in terms of like the core gameplay, right? So what people usually do to try and add depth, right? What a lot of these game developers try to do to add depth is
enemies that require different strategies.
well, they add RPG mechanics, leveling, unlocking skills and modifiers, and stat increases or whatever, like buffs and debuffs, and just RPG mechanics. And there are some people who complain about the shoehorning of RPG mechanics into every game, right? I've seen it. People are like, oh, not another game with RPG mechanics, but that's kind of the go-to to add depth in terms of a lot of game developers, right? Like, because you can add those mechanics and systems into all sorts of different genres, like open world action games like Assassin's Creed have RPG mechanics. You have third person action shooters like Mass Effect with RPG mechanics. You have heck, Sonic Frontiers had some RPG mechanics. You had leveling up and unlocking of skills and combo and special moves. So many different genres add RPG mechanics in order to add depth without having to make to avoid making the base gameplay mechanics complex. What do you think about that trend or that method of adding depth?
Okay, when you refer to RPG mechanics, I think I'm assuming you're mainly talking about like leveling up and gaining stats.
Leveling up stats, experience points, unlocking skills or combo trees, unlocking, different, armor, loot, like armor pieces and gear, weapons. That's all RPG mechanics to an extent. Getting new gear, new skills, experience points, level ups, stat increases usually tied to those level ups, stuff like that.
I think the realm of what you're defining as RPG mechanics is so large that I'm not surprised when I see them. Like I think like a lot of different games would have some form of at least one of those. Like it's a bit reductive almost to call them RPG mechanics, because at this point I think it's just like video game mechanics, honestly.
I think they're just called RPG mechanics because RPGs are the genre that kind of brought them into the gaming space. Because before RPGs, they really didn't exist, those kind of mechanics.
They are from RPGs, but I think they've just become much more eponymous than just to RPGs.
Yeah, like I said, they're in almost every genre now, even some racing games, right? And stuff. So it's like, it's ways to have intrinsic, not intrinsic, extrinsic, like in-game progression at this point.
I just think that if it's something that will affect a player versus player aspect of a game, then you shouldn't have things like stats and experience that inherently give you an advantage over another player for having played more. But like if it's player versus environment, like by all means, like a lot of those things can add to the feeling of I'm progressing, like unless the design of the game ends up to where like you have to like level grind.
Yeah, I get you there.
I think we've gotten into left field a bit, but
well, I mean, it's all kind of tied into it because those kind of mechanics are, like I said, a very common way people add depth to a game without having to make the core gameplay more complex, right? Because then if you think about the other end of the field, right, games where the core gameplay is very complex, in order to achieve that depth, you have games like fighting games, which are PvP. It takes like the action game, right? The character action game, like think of your max level character action game character with all sorts of skills and stuff. But then you apply that to a PvP situation where both players have access, playing the same character have access to the exact same set of tools. And there's a lot of them usually. And, just go at it. Whoever has higher mastery of all that wealth of tools generally will win. And, the genre's kind of known as being fairly inaccessible because they don't know how to, the developers don't know how to teach players how to use those tools, all those tools, in actually viable ways. Because playing against the CPU usually teaches you bad habits that won't work against other players, right? Because players are not predictable like CPUs are. So it's like they have trouble teaching because the depth comes from the complexity, you know? And that complexity makes it harder to learn how to use it well, how to attain that depth.
I have a thought of something else, because you reminded me after you mentioned Sonic Frontiers, and it's related to that, but also other things. Something that can, well, like one thing that is used as a vehicle for trying to add depth, but there's also a problem with this particular thing. Mm-hmm. So giving you more options to do, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you want to add depth, a lot of games will add more options, give you the ability to do more things.
Yeah.
But the issue that can arise with that sometimes is, are all of the options actually valuable and viable? And that's
I know where you're going with this.
Strategy comes in.
I know where you're going with this, especially with how in Sonic Frontiers, some of the skills you unlock later, it just completely trivialized earlier ones, like particularly the projectile-based ones.
Yeah, like there are some things like different enemies that require certain techniques to open them up. For instance, like a lot of defense. A lot of the time, it's a defensive enemy, and it kind of borrows from Sonic Heroes, right, where you had the turtles that you had to loop around to make them vulnerable. You know, you have things like that. But otherwise, talking about just like pure damage dealing options, a lot of them do the same thing. They deal damage. And when you find the one that does the most damage, that's the easiest one to use. Yeah. So if you find that and there's no other benefit to using any of the other options that are simply inferior, then it still simplifies it, and it's almost as if those inferior options don't exist.
So you're getting at something that I've said many times in the past. But, you know, especially in certain hardcore, certain genres, hardcore audiences, they don't like hearing it, or they hardcore disagree with it, pun intended. So basically it's that balance.
You can't see, but I'm rolling my eyes.
Yeah, that balance actually assists in depth, because balance is how the developers prevent those predominant strategies, right? If they can prevent one thing from being so much stronger than everything else, that balance will enable people to have more viable variety of tools, right? Of things to do, and therefore you have more depth, because now you have more potential things that will interact with each other, and that equals depth, right?
Yeah.
So like balance is important.
There's a similar example too from I only heard of this game from an old JonTron video, Aquaman Battle for Atlantis, I believe it is, where they gave a whole move list of like combos. I believe it's like a 2-button combo system, like an XY sort of light strong sort of thing. And there are a bunch of different combos, kind of like in X-Men. What's it called? I keep forgetting the name.
Legends.
X-Men Legends, yeah. But unlike in X-Men Legends, where you have, like, for instance, the pop-up, the stun, they do different things. They give different, conditions. In that old Aquaman game on the GameCube, there's seemingly no discernible difference of any of the more difficult to remember combos from just mashing X. So you're gonna do the easiest thing that basically does the same thing. And that's what a player generally is going to tend toward, unless there's another non-mechanical value to it, which is cool factor. And I believe we've talked about this in a prior episode, but things like character action games or Sonic Frontiers that I had an experience with, where your character is just doing all sorts of cool flips and stuff. It might not always matter if the option is technically better or worse if you enjoy seeing it.
Yeah, pretty much.
The difference in that Aquaman game was that none of the complicated combos were fun to see either.
Yeah,
It was
and
just a bad game.
they weren't
General.
particularly fun to see, and they weren't any better than the basic, just light, light, light kind of.
Yeah, so if you have
Yeah,
neither, the player is just going to match one button.
pretty much, pretty much. So, yeah, it's crazy, but you know, there's a lot of people like, especially in the fighting game, you know, community who seem to like lean towards the complex and games with like overpowered tools and such that I don't know, like you know, I've heard this phrase, you know, that if every character is OP, then the game is balanced. But inevitably in those games, there's always that top tier with a predominant strategy that is just degenerate, you know, like Guilty Gear X and Core Plus R's Testament, throwing out all the Testament, throwing out these traps that you literally it's you know, just trap purgatory basically. Once you get knocked down, here's some traps, you just have to wake up and block, and then your reward for blocking correctly is you get to block more while Testament sets up more traps and pressure, and then eventually mixes you up, gets a knockdown, more traps, you know, and it's really grimy and degenerate. And
I would say to that though, there's also, I mean, I guess I'm talking about an older game, but there's ones like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, where there are actually a lot of strong characters in the game that can do some unique things.
Yeah.
But the long-standing best character in the game is Chun-Li for very actually simple reasons.
Yeah.
Just having an easy confirm into high damage, long-range pokes. Like she actually does some of the least crazy stuff in that game, from what I know. Whereas you have Urian setting up unblockables and Ryu being able to set up a situation where you have to parry or you die.
Yeah,
you know,
knock down into the Denjin super, which means you can't block it when it's fully charged. You have to parry it, or you just get eat all that damage and then get stunned. Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah,
he's not OP character, but he has that one OP predominant strategy, right? For him.
But what I'm saying is, like, that's actually an odd situation where the best character in that game is the best for very simple reasons, as opposed to some other characters in that game that can do crazier stuff, but are generally worse.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but the one character who's better than her is also much harder to play than her, and that would be what was it, Yoon with the Ganejin? Like, he is better than her, but he's harder to, you know, make good use of that with, you know, make good use of his toys.
It's debatable if he's better or not. They're the two best characters, but
I think he is, but he's harder to play with. So he's like the Akira Yuki, you know, of the game from Virtual Fighter. Like, he's the hardest to play, but if you are good at with him, he is the best in the game. That's his role.
Her normals are way better than him, though. So like they have different strengths that don't necessarily, like, they're the two best in the game for opposite reasons.
He's the best when he's in. Once he's gotten in on you, then he's the best. And then when at mid range, Chun-Li's the best. But yeah, they dominate at different ranges, but once he gets in, his damage potential is higher than hers, so he can end rounds faster, giving the opponent less opportunities to make a comeback.
That's just an example, though, that shows that not necessarily always is it that doing the crazy stuff makes you the most OP character in the game. I mean, look at characters like Nappa in Dragon Ball FighterZ. Yeah, he has some crazy, like, invisible resets in the corner, but if he can't get you there, he's kind of crap out of luck.
Yeah. Though that is a game where, like, the pressure can feel pretty crazy in and of itself if you're not the type of person who likes, you know, assist tag games. So Dragon Ball FighterZ is a unique thing, though, because, like, that's a game where, since it has no, like, guard crushing, defense is still allowed to be pretty strong. It's just the pressure can feel overwhelming if you don't have the particular types of personality to latch onto that kind of game, you know.
I think we're in left field again. I think I brought us into left field this time.
But yeah, back to depth. I mean, there's because the thing is, I also think there are different types of depth, right? Because like we've said before, depth doesn't always mean complexity, right?
Yeah.
So that means there has to be types of depth beyond that. So we've touched on variety, right? Depth coming from variety. So, like, variety of choices in different situations, variety of characters that you can play that actually can do well, right? And that's both for, or
Yeah.
builds or what have you, for both single player and multiplayer, right? Like Monster Hunter, right? It's not the most complex game out there in terms of execution, but the depth comes from the fact that the monsters are just as powerful, if not more powerful than you, usually more powerful, and you have to like commit to every action you do. There's no like action canceling, right? Once you do an action, you've committed to it. So the depth comes from the decision making, the positioning, and learning how to fight, learning the monster you're fighting, right? And then also learning how to use your weapon, your chosen weapon, and build effectively. None of it's particularly complex like a fighting game to actually execute. It's more mental, right?
Okay, so the types of depths we have laid out here are options. What, mastery of your options? Would that be considered a different?
I think those are basically the same thing. So the things that can be mastered, right? So you have your like options variety,
decision making,
execution, mechanical execution,
execution,
and then of course the strategy. Strategy,
yeah,
always.
strategy and decision making are kind of the
sort of, yeah.
Okay, well, they're connected, but I guess like
when we say decision making, we think moment to moment, right? Moment to moment decision making.
So,
strategy is more macro.
Decision making, execution, and options. Okay, so like different kinds of games will like lean into different things more or less. I mean, like for instance, we've already talked about it, but fighting games lean harder into the execution range generally than any other
execution,
genre.
Moment to moment decision making, and then variety of options. Yeah.
I mean, there's strategy too. Honestly, a lot of fighting games are very high on all of them, but the thing that separates it from a lot of other genres is the execution. So variety of options can get killed by imbalance of effectivity.
Absolutely.
Decision making. I mean, no. Yeah, momentary decision making can get killed by too many things to keep in account.
Yes,
right? I think that's the killer of that one.
Yes, and that's a problem that is pretty common to fighting games too. Because if you think about games that are a little more simplified, right? Another competitive genre like the MOBAs, right, which are wildly popular. The execution's not as high, right? The execution requirements, mechanical execution's not as high. Each character also has less variety of options, things they can do, right, than in a fighting game. They generally have your basic attack, maybe a boosted basic attack, different skills which can have different traits and modifiers and stuff like that. But generally, 3 or 4 skills and an ult, right? So like the variety is much less, but there's also a lot more characters. Like League of Legends has hundreds of characters. Or over 100 characters. I don't know exactly how many it has. I'm gonna look that up. But no regular traditional fighting game has come close to that many characters.
Yeah, I'm actually taking notes here. So what we said was variety, decision making, strategy. Okay. So and like execution, I think like I'm trying to figure out like what's the killer of each different facet.
Well, right? The killer of mechanical execution is predominant strategies, right? Predominant tactics. So like if something is so powerful and easy to do, why would you ever do the mechanically execution heavy thing, right? So
okay, so that ends up having the same issue as that variety does then.
Yeah. No, literally. So a lack of balance is basically the killer of that, because if the mechanically what's the word I'm looking for? Strenuous, I guess, demanding things are not stronger than the simpler things, then there will be no reason to do them.
Okay, and when it comes to strategy, I feel like we're almost gonna just reach the same conclusion that the thing that can kill depth due to strategy, the lack of balance.
Yeah,
like
as if something is imbalanced, if the one thing is so powerful, one strategy is so powerful, why would you ever want to do anything else, right? And put yourself at a disadvantage. So like even in real-time strategies, right? When certain strategies became, I've watched a few videos on it, when certain strategies became just extremely powerful and ruled the meta, right? Oh,
You know,
there you go. You
and-
can tie this into your card game experience, right? If you have one strategy or deck type that is so powerful,
Okay,
why would you try any other strategy?
I was actually gonna go into a different area. Strangely enough, I was thinking of back when we played Overwatch,
Mm-hmm.
the dive meta.
Mm.
Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, back when it was just like
Winston's,
characters
Genji's,
like Winston,
Tracers.
Genji, and Tracer, just characters that can move real fast, just rush everything. Like that beat any other strategy.
Yeah.
And then
the back line was what is usually Reinhardt and a healer. That way, then they could push forward slowly with the objective while the other three dive from all their angles to flank.
Yeah. So
and it became about who can take out the back line of the other team first, and then come back to fight the other team's divers.
And if I remember correct, like that was the most centralizing meta of Overwatch. Though there was also
that we experienced
at another point the 3 tanks, 3 healers.
Yeah, I think they called that goats or something like that. Basically, the 3 strongest tanks and the 3 strongest healers, and then it was a stalemate until one team was able to take someone out on the other, and yeah.
But I think it's interesting though that in determining what are basically the 4 factors of depth in video games, 3 of them have the same issue that can lead to not working properly, but the issue that can kill the decision-making factor is over complexity.
Yeah.
Not balance.
Because if there's too much to keep track of, then it's gonna eventually something's gonna slip past your notice. The mental stack, right, as they call it in fighting games, is the amount of things you have to look out for is going to make it harder for you to react to each of them, right? Yeah, it makes sense, and it keeps coming back to balance, right? If something's
it's almost like a scale though, because if you keep adding things in order to get that balance, to get the other 3 factors right, then you might overload the issue that can kill the decision making, which is making it too complex. So trying to add in more systems and more things in order to, and I think this is more of an issue in player versus player games, which even though we're not just a fighting game podcast anymore, it always seems to come back to fighting games because they're just much more delicate when it comes to the balance of things that can make a game feel good or bad.
For sure.
Because you can get away with making things unbalanced in a single player or a PvE game. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter. You're not competing against another person. I mean, in Monster Hunter Rise, you could have a teammate that's just swinging a long sword, but you're not going to be as irritated that's so much more of an effective and simple to use.
Well, yeah, because in co-op, someone using something that's OP only assists you, right? It only aids you. It helps you. You benefit from it.
But an ally using longsword and you're using hunting horn is kind of the equivalent of Dragon Ball Fighters. One person is using Bardock and the other is using Ginyu, but the only difference is you're not against each other.
Yeah, so one doing it doesn't detriment the other. They're assisting each other.
For those who don't know, in Dragon Ball Fighters, Ginyu is a very technically difficult character, whereas Bardock is
Unga Bunga.
Monkey Islands.
Yeah, he's a powerful and effective, straightforward Unga Bunga character. So yeah, it's and that's the thing, PvP always has a more delicate balance because here's the thing too. A lot of people complain that if a game is too balanced, then it feels sanitized and boring. Of course, a lot of times in the fighting game community, that's people who liked the imbalanced games like Marvel vs. Capcom's of the genre, but...
Well, those are also the players that use top tier.
Yeah, usually, because look at Marvel vs. Capcom 3.
Don't take away my top tiers.
Yeah, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, right? Virgil and Zero.
Yeah. So of course they don't want a game that's more balanced because they're some of the players that decide to to play the strongest characters
and benefit from the
and if
imbalance.
you make the game more balanced, then more of their opponents are going to be stronger because you're not going to have the people that choose to play Phoenix right going against you.
Yeah, but then when you get people from the outside, right? Because look at Dragon Ball Fighters and how that went, right? When you were seeing the same, like, what, 5 characters in different teams of 3, right? For a time.
Well, okay, early on,
What was this?
the
It was during the
biggest
Cell,
issue with
Kid Buu, Bardock, the Rat, Kid Goku. It's just during those days when you would see generally the same 5 or 6 characters on, in different groupings of 3, right?
Okay, you're thinking of like, yeah, the top character of each like patch or group of patches basically, but actually the thing that you're forgetting is the most long-standing issue with homogenization of teams in Dragon Ball Fighters was the beam assist meta. Because back when there was only 1 assist per character, the beam was the best assist. It covers a full horizontal range on the ground, and there are only 3 characters with a beam: Super Saiyan Goku, Goku Black, and Tien. Tien's beam is worse. It's smaller. It has worse frame data.
Right.
Goku Black's beam is the same as
Goku's.
Super Saiyan Goku's in functionality, but Super Saiyan Goku was a much better character on his own as well.
Yeah.
So actually, for a number of seasons, you saw Super Saiyan Goku as everybody's anchor.
Yeah. Well, what I was saying though, what I was getting at was I remember a period of time where the amount of viable characters in competitive play anyway was so little, compared to the total of the cast, the total number of the playable roster. And so then people, and Dragon Fighters had a lot of more outsiders coming into it because it's Dragon Ball, right? And it was in modern days, so it's more newcomers to the genre and to tag, assist games than the old Marvel vs. Capcom guard, who are, mostly just the longtime players, right? So then, when there was less characters being played, people started getting bored, right? People, especially spectators, right? They just started getting bored of seeing the same things over and over and over, right? Just like with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, people got bored of seeing Virgil and Zero all the time, and stuff like that. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 got tired of seeing Sentinel and Storm and Doctor Doom all the time. When you have that centralizing imbalanced meta, then over-centralized imbalanced meta, people get bored, right? But generally, if you're not the people, like the hardcore who are okay with that, the few who are okay with that, you're going to get bored when the game is imbalanced, right? But then some of these types who like that stuff try to say that a balanced game is boring. It's such a dichotomy.
It's interesting you say that because I think it actually kind of depends. Because, you saw that very thing happen with Bardock, right? People were so sick of seeing his level 3, but particularly what I'm thinking of is Bardock here. People were so sick of seeing his level 3 because it gave such good OP that any Bardock player would use level 3 at any time they could, basically.
To end the combos.
To get that like
hard
4-way,
knockdown
easy 4-way mix off of a hard knockdown. However, there was a period of time where Cell was the best character that was being used in a lot of people's teams, but Cell was almost so much of a like spectator favorite that at the beginning of the game, when you saw his intro, like the whole crowd would yell with Cell.
Right.
So
variety.
It's not necessarily seeing the same thing. It's not necessarily seeing the same thing all the time. That is the only factor of people getting bored. It's also how people feel about that same thing. Because people got so irritated at Bardock, but they liked to see Cell because the reason why he was so good was very different from Bardock's. It wasn't like multi-factor.
Well, I think
it was the crazy combos and stuff.
I think the reason so many people were less bored with Cell too was because Cell had enough variety in his toolkit that different players would play Cell differently. You had some people that did those loops, right? Those really tight timing loops. Then others that would use like that rolling elbow drop move, and then others who would use the perfect attack and stuff like that. So different players kind of use different tools in different ways, right? You know what I mean? So there was more variety within the one character. Whereas with Bardock, everyone kind of played him the same. Bunga bunga.
Also, Cell didn't have the tools that like would make Bardock so good, which is we already talked about the level 3, but also his zone breaking, lariat move.
Yeah.
So Cell didn't have something like that. He played a bit more of an honest neutral.
Bardock was less versatile. He was more, well, it's like I said, right? I get bored of seeing aggression, like rushdown all the time, right? Just pure aggression, because it feels very samey to me. And I get tired of fighting against that because it feels so samey. Bardock was a very straightforward, just unga bunga attack, right? And his stuff was good for that. And then he ended the combos with the same super every time. Whereas Cell had more things that he could do in different situations, and different players put their own touches onto it. So versatility.
He had better block strings. Honestly, he wasn't as uniquely played as he seemed to think. I mean, like, everybody during that period of time was doing the Cell loops. People that did like TODs would use like the perfect attack in some of their TODs and stuff like that.
Touch of death, instant.
And block strings. I mean, the optimal block strings are kind of like the same a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily even just being uniquely played, because, like, honestly, Cell wasn't that uniquely played between the different, like, high level players that use him, from what I know, what I see.
Maybe.
It was just the different aspects of the character.
Right. So I want to say hi to Keo Bastain. Welcome. We're talking about depth in video game design and like the sources of that depth. So far, just to recap, we've kind of talked about how a lot of different aspects of depth, complexity being one of them, another being decision making, or another one being macro strategy.
We got a DVFC player.
Yep. And then we had, like, what was it, variety, right? And then
See, this what we were talking about is like what we see as like the 4 different aspects of depth are like execution, variety, decision making, and strategy.
Yeah.
But like the thing that can mess up execution, decision making, and strategy a lot of the time is balance, whereas the thing that can make decision making,
more accurately, imbalance.
Yeah, imbalance.
A lack of balance.
And the thing that can mess with the decision making aspect is having too many things over
many moving parts. Yeah.
Overcomplication. Yeah. But yeah, like this goes with what I just said about, it was like the different aspects of the character. Cell was an all-rounder, and Bardock was rushdown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess that does lend to what you were saying about there's a bit more variety. There was a bit more variety to Cell, even though you could put him in more spots on a team as well.
Because if everyone's playing Cell as one of their 3 characters, how you play him and how you structure the team around him can change up things and add more variety, right? And that keeps people from getting bored and feeling like the game is too over centralized and imbalanced, right? So that's just a case where a balanced character, in this case all-rounder, kind of gave a bit more variety.
We've talked a lot about fighting games. I just thought of something completely different to add to the topic of depth, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And also like Puyo Puyo.
Like puzzle games like that have a PvP element to them.
Because like obviously anyone can play Tetris, right? That's why it's such a it's one of the most sold games. Like it's iconic for that reason. But you see like Tetris masters play it, and they're setting up patterns, they're doing T-spins.
The game has crazy depth, but it's not complex.
Yeah.
The rules are simple.
It's very simple to pick up, and there is an extremely high ceiling.
Yeah, that's why I said depth is the level of mastery possible for players, but it's not always paired with complexity. Like I said at the very beginning, complexity usually does increase depth, but at the cost of accessibility or approachability. Depth does not always need complexity, since there's more types of depth.
And you know what? Tetris is an example of having basically no execution barrier, because there there's only like what there's moving left and right. There's the make the thing drop faster or the hard drop. There's
Like a snap down.
in some versions just one button to turn the piece. Sometimes you have two, to turn it left or right.
And then sometimes you have the
in some
hold.
versions of Tetris, you have the hold button.
But it's not
That's
not an executionally difficult game to play. Now, obviously,
But
there are people who push
most
that to
of
its
the way-
limits, like the Tetris World Championship type players. They have like different ways of tapping the directions and stuff to do it faster. But that's their techniques with their fingers and stuff rather than in-game stuff. Like how you press the buttons on the controller.
Yeah. That says executing strategy is still execution and stuff. Okay, to clarify, what I mean by execution is physical execution
Mechanical
and things
execution.
that you need to, mechanical things that you need to like get the muscle memory into it. Strategy is like a separate facet that we're talking about.
Yeah,
and
when we speak
like,
of strategy, we're talking about the
Tetris
mental.
and Puyo, and using Tetris and Puyo as an example, they are heavily into the strategy and moment-to-moment decision making.
Yeah, and
Like
planning
that's-
ahead when you have the previews of the next pieces coming. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the strategy.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a cross section of strategy and decision making.
Yeah, but they're
Seeing
both
the-
mental. They're both the mental aspect, not the mechanical. Yeah. Because nothing mechanical is going to change how that works, right? You can't mechanically change how the hold system or the preview system works to your advantage. You just can't. There is no mechanical aspect to that. It's all mental. It's look at the preview, plan out what you're going to do next, It's all mental.
And there are PvP versions of Tetris and 2-player Puyo as well as Puyo Tetris.
Mhm.
And it does add another layer with the junk pieces. Well, Puyo is one versus another in general. It just it's whether you're going against a CPU or a
Puyo is
player.
always
But
head to head.
has solitary forms, and then there are also Tetris is where you can do one person versus another.
Yeah. And so but like those games too, it's kind of reminds me of chess, really, right? Like all of it is not very complex. Like chess, how many different pieces are there? There's the pawn, the rook, the bishop, the knight, the king, and the queen. So 6 pieces. And each of them have their own rules, right? But once you know how each piece can move and take other pieces, that's all you need to memorize. Then the rest comes from the macro strategy, right? And how you adjust your strategy based on what's just happened. That's it. It's not a complex game to play, really. It's actually quite easy to play once you know the rules of the pieces. And then after that, there's a wealth of depth, right? Because it's a game that's been existed for hundreds of years and has never been mastered to the perfect extent because it can't be because of the human element.
If we're talking about the like stat square that we've sort of set up, chess is a game where basically the other 3 stats are at like a 1 or a 0.5, and then then strategy is like at the maximum. You know?
Like, but it's
because obviously the only execution you need is being able to move a chess piece. There's no moment to like. I guess speed chess can up the decision making a little bit more, but you're not reacting to something. You just have to think faster. Well, there is some measure of reacting in that you have to adjust your strategy depending on how your opponents move their pieces. Right? There's not physical reaction. It's just just making the strategy element of it have to function faster.
Adaptability, not reactions.
Yeah.
No, I get you. And so, like, depth doesn't have to come with complexity, basically. Complexity is not the only way to add depth. It is a way to add depth, but it's not the only way.
We're kind of getting like sort of examples of each different aspect right here as we talk. So like fighting games are the preeminent like execution example. I guess
puzzle games and
you
chess.
could put chess in the puzzle games and chess in the strategy part. And like what's the other 2 were variety and decision making.
And so variety based depth is a lot more prevalent, I would say, in cooperative games generally, because you're not going against other players. So then it's all about finding your way to meet the goal with other players, right? Like Monster Hunter as our main example, being one of my main stream game for the last year. Every single weapon and stuff is viable, right? There's no reason why you could consider anything unviable, because you're only helping each other, right? You're not able to, you using one strategy or build isn't going to detriment other players, right? Unless of course you're just dying 3 times or dying 2 times and then leaving the instance, right? But that's a bit of a weird thing. But like, generally every different weapon type in Monster Hunter is viable, right? In their own different ways.
Okay, so would you say then that your example of a game that is much more bent on variety than the other 3 would be Monster Hunter?
Well, and just like player versus environment, like cooperative games in general, kind of, because think about character action games, right, which are solo player versus environment. By the time you reach high levels or near the end of the campaign, you have a wealth of different things you can do, but it gradually ramped you up to it. You have so much variety, right? Actually, a lot of them even encourage you to use variety by, the ranking systems that will not go up, will not increase if you just do the same thing over and over. You have to do variety to get the higher ranks on your character action games and stuff.
Don't let me interrupt you, but when you're done with your thought, I have a radically different idea that may throw it a little bit for a loop.
Well, that was pretty much all I was thinking of, because in a lot of times in player versus environment, variety is encouraged, if not rewarded,
Okay, so let me set this up. We're generally a gaming podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
But who says that has to be just video games?
Yeah.
I would posit tabletop gaming as a form of game that rewards variety of option.
Absolutely. Yeah, your party needs to be varied to succeed.
Not only that, but what you can do, because it's not based on any kind of program. It is fundamentally open to many more varieties of options of things that you can do. I'll submit, and this already, but the one of the few actual tabletop campaign sessions that I've run in real life with friends and family, including you. This is going to be the first time the viewers have heard that, or the listeners have heard this though. But so it was a tabletop game in a superhero setting, think DC or Marvel.
Silver Age superheroes, mostly DC style, very Justice League-y, actually, type of setting.
And I'll try to tell the story in quick fashion.
Mm-hmm.
But so the situation was a squad of villains that 2 of them were waiting outside a tech company building, and they sent in a goon inside to retrieve a special tech component in a briefcase. The goon had this belt that let him duplicate himself, kind of a multiple man deal. So I had something planned for if someone chased him inside the building, doing hot potato with the briefcase, sort of a chase sequence through an office floor sort of thing. None of that happened. All of my players, and there were 4 players, including Sam here. All of the players kept outside, and in fact, one of the players never even engaged with the fight with the 2 that were outside. But once the goon came out with the briefcase and tried to hightail it out of there, Sam stopped him, and then the other player that hadn't even gotten to the fight, her character was this sort of rich, basically think a combination, a cross between Batman and Elektra. Mm-hmm. She was super rich and trained with ninjas and had a vendetta mission. She came in and said, "You know what? I'll pay you triple what they're paying you to just give me the briefcase." And he negotiated and said, I also want to, not be arrested for this. But that is a crazy display of the variety of option, because you can even step outside the normal framework of fight the villains, mm-hmm. and just come up with a narrative solution to a situation.
A roleplay solution rather than a combat solution. Yeah.
So I would say tabletop RPGs are the most extreme example of a game based on variety.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Particularly narrative tabletop RPGs. I'm not talking stuff like
Crunchy
Warhammer.
ones. Yeah, well, because the
Yeah,
whole
I'm not
point
talking
of
about
tabletop
board games.
RPGs is create your own world, do whatever you want, kind of feel. You know, it's the open world game, what the open world game tried to do, the open world RPG, but amped up to 11 because there's no constraints of programming, like you said.
Yeah. And so unlike any game that relies on programming, you can even ask, basically ask the game, as in asking the game master, hey, can I do this even though it's not in the rules? And they might say, sure, go for it.
Yeah, they might make a concession.
They might say, if you make this roll,
Yeah. They can make concessions and exceptions and stuff like that. So, no, that makes perfect sense. And then, and even the more number crunchy type of tabletop RPGs where you have a party, they reward you for having variety in the party. Like, a team full of healers won't be able to win a combat situation. A team full of thieves or rogues or whatever you want to call it aren't going to be able to win a situation because they're squishy, right? As soon as you get hit, you're going to die and you won't have anyone to revive or heal you. A team full of tanks won't be able to, DPS their way through anything. It's like that. A team full of monks and fighters, right? You need variety. It's required to have a good experience.
But a game master could also purposefully make an encounter, a session, or a campaign where y'all decide, okay, we're doing a game where we're all healers, and we're gonna, see how it happens, and the game master might make it so that the game is
tailored
bent toward that being possible.
Yeah.
So that's just another form of variety that is potentially limitless. The variety of ways in which you can set the game up for an experience. I mean, I've literally heard of campaigns where the party just decides to start an item shop or something. They're not even being adventurers. They're just staying in one spot or building a kingdom or something.
So freedom, player freedom.
Yeah. It's way more potential variety than any video game could have.
That is absolutely true.
I would place that, although that kind of breaks the rules of if you're just talking about video games. So for video games, yeah, I would probably say Monster Hunter. But for games in general, I would place narrative tabletop games in that spot.
True. That's a good point too, because I have spoken alone in Morning Boot Up on the virtues of player freedom in game design, and tabletop games are literally player freedom incarnate. But
granted,
embodied.
There's some groups that will play not in that way, and you just play just by the rules or the book, but that's your freedom to be able to do that.
Well, something I've said too in a connecting episode of Morning Boot Up too was that complete freedom is not always great, because if you give the players freedom to do anything, no restrictions, no consequences, you get chaos, you get pandemonium.
Yeah, then sometimes you get that guy in a group when the players aren't all aligned in what kind of thing they want to do.
You need structure. You need some sort of structure, limitations, and balance in order to keep that from going off the rails too much, right?
That's fair.
So
that's fair, because something like Monster Hunter, it's literally impossible to get that guy who says, okay, I'm just going to start an item shop. You can't.
No.
That's the program.
No. And sometimes you will get that guy who's I'm just gonna face tank everything from this monster, right? and then cart 2 times or cart 3 times. But you can kind of circumvent it. That's what I did. I became the healer, the team tank healer kind of guy with the sword and shield. I kept people from dying so that they could face tank and damage the monsters more, and we win, right? Even with randoms. I had a good time.
Yeah.
So, it's having that structure is good. Player freedom is great. Structure is good too. And as I said in the limitations Morning Boot Up, not restrictions for the sake of restriction, right? We're not talking about malicious restriction or inconvenience design, right? Inconvenience elements or mechanics. that only serve to be a detriment to the player experience, like we've talked about in Monster Hunter, old Monster Hunter. If you don't drink cold drinks when you go to the volcano, you're at subpar capacity. But if you do drink it, you're only at baseline capacity. You don't particularly benefit from it, you just avoid a detriment. You know what I mean? And so we both said that that's a good element to remove. It's good that they removed that from Monster Hunter Rise, because it was only served to be a detriment if you didn't interact with it. That's not what we're talking about when we say limitations, because that's just limitations that serve to only be an inconvenience to the players. We're talking about limitations that create structure, and then in that way add depth through players finding strategies, finding out ways around those limitations, or strategies that take advantage of those limitations to then succeed. And that applies both to PvE and PvP, right? It's like Fire Emblem, like a strategy game, right? Solely PvE. There's a lot of limitations. How far each unit can move, how far their attack range is, how many uses they have for different types of weapons and equipment. And it's all about the player finding out how to make use of those limitations and succeed despite them, and maybe even using them to their advantages because the enemies have the same limitations as them, right? And so they tie that into their strategy, and that's how you succeed, and that adds depth, right? And that's a case where the limitation creates depth. It's just not of a mechanical execution type, it's of a strategy type, cerebral, mental type, So, there's all different ways to add depth to the games. And that's why we wanted to talk about this, because there's so many different pieces to it, and so many different varieties of depth, different forms, of depth. And having played so many games in our life, we've seen a lot of them, right? We've played platformers, we've played fighting games, I've played some real-time strategy games. We've played turn-based RPGs, we've played strategy turn-based RPGs like Fire Emblem, we've played, chess a lot. Or at least I played a lot of chess in my life. We played a little bit of tabletop, but we've observed a lot of tabletop, so we understand it through observation too. And so there's just so many different aspects and avenues of depth. It's not as simple as some people like to put it. Some people like to say, if this game lacks this, if this game lacks A, then it doesn't have depth, and B doesn't count towards depth. But in reality, that's more of that's not the depth I want, because depth isn't just one thing. It comes in many different forms. Like if this game is too simple, it's got no depth. That's the most common we've heard. This game's too simple, it has no depth. It's boring. But we know that depth doesn't come just from mechanical execution. We just talked about Tetris. So that's kind of what in the way back. This topic was kind of one that we put into the list of potential topics for podcast episodes back when the podcast was just fighting game centric, but it still applies to more than just that genre,
each of us has come in with a wild card edition. You come in with the chess, I came in with tabletop games, but I love it. On this idea, and like we didn't come into this with the idea, but like I came up with the idea basically of finding these games that represent each of the four aspects, so like for execution, it's generally fighting games. For variety is Monster Hunter, and also tabletop games. For strategy, you have ones like Puyo, Tetris, and also chess.
Puzzle games and turn-based strategy games.
But now I'm at a point where it's a little difficult because decision making, moment to moment decision making. What's a game that leans much more into that than anything else? Because the issue that I'm having thinking about it is a lot of the games that I can think of that focus on that.
I've got it.
Also have execution, like fighting games.
Dark Souls and the Souls-likes. They are not executionally difficult. You have attack, you have your light attack, heavy attack, and your roll, right?
Is that more decision making than strategy though?
Yeah, it's very much moment-to-moment decision making, and then learning the enemies, right? That's literally the core of it.
Like, while they have certain particular attacks, the enemies in Soulsborne games don't have patterns like they would in a game like Mega Man. Like
they're not
Mega Man.
Yeah, honestly, Monster Hunter has a lot in common with Dark Souls in that way. That they don't operate on strict patterns like in Mega Man. Classic Mega Man games. They they have set, you know, certain things they can do, but when they do them, you're not going to be able to predict exactly. So you do need to moment decide, okay, he used this attack, I dodged it, now do I go for positioning or do I go for damage? You know, or do I back up and go for healing, right? So there is a lot of it's all decision making, learning the opponents and what you can do in reaction to each thing that the different opponents can do.
I feel like there's a little bit of a difficulty delineating some of these things from decision making. I feel like decision making has a lot more of a Venn diagram with some of the other aspects.
There's no such thing as a video game that has no decision making. Think about it. Even visual novels have decisions you have to make. Branching points and dialogue.
More like you have to make a decision quickly. I guess
that kind of comes paired with reactions. So
yeah, I can't rightly just call it reactions though, because there's
no. I say it comes paired with reactions. So
yeah. No, I was just.
But still, I would say the Souls-likes are the ones because they're not executionally difficult. You have your attacking buttons, usually 2 of them, and you have your dodge roll, and then you have your use your healing item button or whatever. You know, your D-pad for like your healing item, your steed in Elden Ring. You know, it's very simple mechanically speaking. They're not the most mechanically, you know, demanding games. Same as Monster Hunter, you know, and they share in common with Monster Hunter the fact that every time you commit to an action, you're committing to that full animation. There's no animation canceling, you know? Like what created the combos in fighting games, right? The animation canceling. There is none of that in the Souls-like or Monster Hunters. It's all about that moment-to-moment decision-making and learning the opponents. But you're not going to be able to memorize a pattern because they don't have those patterns. Not specifically.
So now that you're making the comparison between Monster Hunter and Soulsborne's, I'm wondering, because I feel like it's accurate, but what does make Monster Hunter more emblematic of variety and Dark Souls more emblematic of...
Oh no, they both are pretty equally... They both are pretty equally, like, emblematic of both, really, because you have build variety, you have weapon types, you know, armor types, especially in Dark Souls where they make you fat roll and stuff, you know, if you go heavily armored.
Yeah,
they both have healthy amounts of both.
Like there's no pattern.
Well, there are patterns in, like, attacks. Like, for example, the enemy starts his attack, okay, it's going to be 1, 2, 3 strikes, and then that's it. But after that attack, it's not guaranteed to do a specific other thing.
Then the next attack, then the next attack, like something like NES Mega Man.
Yeah, like, what we mean by patterns is, so let's take a Mega Man thing, right? Let's take a Mega Man boss. This boss does 1, 2, 3 hops, then an attack. Then 1, 2, 3 hops, then an attack. Without fail, every time. That's a pattern we're talking about. We're not talking about patterns within attack animations. Like, oh, this attack is 1, 2, 3 swipes, then one last swipe with a delay. But then you're not guaranteed that it's going to, like, hop, 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 and then do that same attack again. The pattern like that doesn't exist.
Because you've, like, seen people fight, like, Soulsborne bosses, and they're like, they did that one? No!
Yeah.
You know? Like, they didn't expect a certain attack at a certain point.
Yeah, because it's not a hard and fast pattern like in the old school NES Mega Man type games of...
Yeah, they'll have, like, attack number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they might do, like, 1, 4, 6, 3, 6, 4. You know?
Yeah. So it's not a hard and fast pattern that once you memorize that pattern, you just will succeed. No, you have to be able to, like...
Bag of tricks, but it's a bag of tricks that they have, but they reach in and grab a random one.
Because we've seen people, like, where they fight a Souls-like boss, and it's like they dodged a certain attack, and they were not expecting that exact same attack again, but the boss did it, and caught them off guard because of their positioning, right? You know? So, you know, the pattern wasn't there. There was no pattern that they could just memorize and then win. They could memorize, like, the attacks do certain amounts of strikes and then reset. Yeah, but that's not what we mean by patterns.
Yeah.
So, it's funny stuff, though, when that kind of stuff happens. Because, like, even in Monster Hunter, I've sometimes gotten caught off guard. Like after a monster did a dash attack, I wasn't expecting them to do, like, a wide swipe, so I run in behind them, and they just, boom, swing their tail and smack me back. And I'm like, I wasn't expecting that. Ugh. You know? So... You know, if it was like every time it did the dash, then it did the swipe and turned around, okay, then I would not have gone in, you know, because the pattern was there. But no, there was no pattern to exploit. So, yeah. But yeah, so, like, you know, there's a lot of Yeah, this was pretty fun though, talking about this. Okay, so something I wanted to talk about real quick then to wrap up the discussion, I think, is how important is depth to an experience in a game. And I think this will tie in nicely to our next episode. Okay, because next episode we're going to have a guest speaker and we're going to talk about like gameplay and story in games and the importance of both, you know, alone and together. But in this case, depth. How necessary is depth for a game to be fun?
Okay, I have a maybe a curveball. I was thinking about this before we started, but then I forgot in like the hour while I was waiting. Mobile games very, very rarely have the kind of depth that you see in console games, right?
Pretty much.
But
I mean, they have to be bite-sized, right? They have to be bite-sized friendly.
Yeah, they have to be bite-sized, and people get addicted. Now, part of that is also just like the design of the thing, and like sometimes using dark design,
psychological exploitation.
And there's literally like laws around dark design, design elements. Sometimes that can like funnel you toward like actually spending money. Games like Fortnite have had that. Like I've only heard a little bit about it. It's crazy stuff. Maybe I'll do some research for an episode in the future. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we can do an episode on exploitative game design, something like that. Yeah.
That sounds interesting. But yeah, so like a lot of mobile games have very simple gameplay design. Some to the point where I could barely classify it as gameplay at all. But people sometimes enjoy it, or sometimes get addicted to it without having to enjoy it.
Yeah, but for you and me, we've always been of the mind, we've always gotten bored of mobile games after not too long. It's rare for a mobile game to hold our attention for an extended period of time, really. And even the ones that we do latch onto for a bit, longer than most, eventually will lose us. Like, we enjoyed Mega Man X Dive for quite a while. That was one of the longest times I've ever played any one mobile game. And even then, it eventually lost me, you know?
Yeah.
Even then. One of the best mobile games I've ever played that was very gameplay centric, right? It felt like a Mega Man X game. It actually had gameplay, right? It got boring after a while.
The time game aspects of mobile gameplay. It also was much more simplified versions of like Mega Man style stages, but it was more. Yeah. It had more complexity and more depth than most mobile games do.
Yeah, so that kept us longer than most, but still.
But yeah, so is your question though to depth's importance, is that from the perspective of succeeding as a designer, or enjoying a game as a consumer, as a player?
Enjoying it as a player, because we know that the predatory design is to succeed in terms of making money, but that doesn't necessarily make the game more fun. And more often than not, they detract from the game.
And like I've even heard like people online that talk about playing gacha games like Fate Go or whatever, and they're like, I love it and I hate it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And even then, a lot of those games tend to also sometimes are games that just kind of play themselves.
Yeah.
Which is like zero depth. Anti-depth.
Yeah, like what's it? The thing, all those like Ship
Epic
Girl,
7?
I was thinking like all those Ship Girl Japanese games,
Countai Collection,
Con Collect, and other stuff. Like Azure Lane or whatever.
Yeah. Those actually, because aren't those the only form of depth, is just how you build your team, and then like the slight like behavioral strategies you give them. Like on this one, it's like fallback, or this one, frequency of healing, and then you just let them just play the game for you.
I think so. To be honest, I haven't seen.
I think that's how Countai Collection is anyway. The Japanese absolutely love Countai Collection though, because they love that. Like they prefer the strategy over the actual gameplay. Yeah, they like the strategic element of the preparation, and then they like watching their plan, making a plan, and then watching the plan come to fruition, even though they're not the ones executing the plan themselves, right?
What's that tower defense one that you tried though?
Oh, heck, I know which one you're talking about. Arc Knights.
Arc Knights, yeah.
See, the thing about that though is, in that one you have to place the units in real time because you're gaining the action points as time passes. So you can't just place all your units out and wait. You have to place them, and you have to do so reactively to like where the enemies are going to come from. And then
I'm not saying that
in
it's
real
a game
time you
that
have to use the
doesn't have
skills
depth.
too.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's a game that plays itself, but does it have depth? You're the only one that's tried it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get too far into it, and yeah, I would say it was there was one time where I actually did fail a mission because I don't remember. I think because of a unit, I didn't bring the right kind of unit or something. Like I needed a unit with specific range or skill set or something like that. But yeah, it didn't feel like it had a whole lot of depth, really. But you know, like I said, I didn't get very far, so I could be wrong, but yeah.
Consider that we're not the average person.
Yeah, I know. That's why this.
Think of it in that theory of mind, like
yeah.
I mean, you know, we all know the stereotype of like the middle-aged mom that plays Candy Crush and stuff. Like, not every kind of game is for everyone, and people that are less versed in gaming, more depth can be over their like lower threshold of what's over complex, right?
Yeah,
so
I would say
like depending on the person, something that has way too little depth for us, perfect for them.
I would say if the challenge comes from whether or not you have certain types of units or characters or whatever, you know, rather than anything you can master, that's not really mastery, you know, and it's not really depth. That's the game design that makes you want to spend money to get more characters, right? And better characters and higher star characters or whatever. I wouldn't call that depth, because then it's like, it's less about have you mastered the game's mechanics, you know, or how have you gotten good at the game's mechanics, or just the game in itself, to how much money have you spent on the game. That's not depth, you know?
Yeah, but listen though, what I'm saying is, because like your question was
how necessary is it to have fun?
How necessary is depth to have fun? And I'm saying that
there's a lot of people.
It depends on a person's, you know, how well versed they are in gaming and in different aspects.
Their preference, right? And their tolerance for. Because
generally, people who just don't have as much experience in gaming, more depth is going to be more detrimental to their enjoyment. Whereas, you know, someone who, like us, who has been playing games for all our lives, something that simple is going to be like going back to baby food.
Yeah, no, and that's why I felt like this question was a good, like, if nothing else, even if we don't answer it in this episode, a great segue to the next episode. Because next one we're going to be talking about, you know, story and gameplay in games, and like how important they are individually, or how important they are in tandem, and like, because that topic for the next episode and the person we're going to have as a guest, third seat, is someone who very much enjoys Genshin Impact, right? And I've tried playing it, but I got bored because it just lacked depth for me. It lacked enough depth for me. It felt too simple, and there wasn't enough for me to really enjoy in the combat, you know? And I'm of the mind where even the best story, you know, if the gameplay's boring, even the best story just won't keep me playing, you know? And people say they love Genshin's story. That's why I wanted to have her on for that topic. And so we'll be having a Rixies with us on the show next episode. We've already planned it out, the date. So that's why I wanted to ask that question, though, of how necessary is depth for fun, because that's a good segue into that topic, because she's someone who loves Genshin, and she loves the story, and she loves the gameplay. For me, it feels too simple, and it couldn't keep my interest, so there wasn't enough depth for me, right?
Yeah, but for
so like you said, there are different thresholds.
For lack of a better option, to not sound like a broken record.
Yeah,
I think the answer comes down to it depends.
Yeah,
right? It depends on the person, because for someone who's been playing video games for 20 years, yeah, you're gonna need more depth. For someone who's just getting in, more depth can drive them away. Although, you know, there are cases that we already talked about, like with Tetris, where it has depth, but if you don't have to plumb into that. You know, Tetris sort of scales according to to how good you are at it.
Yeah.
So
then how about we wrap this up by giving our own personal preferences on that then. So what's the side prime? What's your feeling on like the importance of depth for you to enjoy a game? What are your feelings regarding depth?
Well, see, I think like any gamer has like unless you're the type of person who like only plays one game, right? Which is those people are out there. But like there are different kinds of treats, like sometimes you go to something that you just want to play when you just want to play for like a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or whatever. Like for me currently, and for a while, that's been Pokemon Unite.
Yeah.
Right? There isn't much depth to go into. I play the game, I play it well, I enjoy it all right, for like, I don't know, half an hour a day or something, and move on. But other times you want to sit down and you really want to chew into something, so when you want more depth like that, I mean, I still haven't been playing many games, to be honest. The most substantial game I played recently was Sonic Frontiers, but I've sort of chewed into that a little more with the release of the first wave of DLC, right? With the cyberspace challenges and the boss rush challenges, like that sort of mastery of going into it and being like, okay, I'm going to get really good at this and get the S rank. So I think there's a place for everything.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm the type of person that gets bored with the same thing all the time, but I can be content with like 2 or 3 things that cover all of my needs. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am. Like my simple game, Pokemon Unite, just kind of covers that. When I want something more that I have plenty of other things that I can get into, and I mean I still need to start Metroid Dread, really.
Yeah. And then you have card games and stuff too, and so yeah.
Yeah.
For me personally, I've always been a little odd regarding this because
I've also played Dragon Ball FighterZ a few times. In the past like multiple weeks.
Yeah. So for me, I've always been a little like particular. Well, not always, but like in more recent years, I've become more particular. But like when it comes to player versus player, right? I like the games to have depth in forms that aren't mechanical execution complexity. I like the depth to be more of the mental aspects than the mechanical execution aspects. So like I like Kyo said a little earlier. Fast feedback and slow feedback. When it comes to player versus player in competitive games, I prefer the slow feedback. I like having those moments of inaction or lulls in action, lulls in the action between bursts of action rather than just constant action. So like I like Samurai Showdown, or like Virtua Fighter. While that's played up close, Virtua Fighter especially is very much played up close and a lot of decisions to make. It's for short bursts, so it's decisions, fast, then a knockdown happens, and that's a break, because you're not going to be able to hit the opponent once they're knocked down, and you have to be wary of their get-up attack, right? Because it's invincible. Yeah. So you have to block it, and then you're back to the actions. So there's a lull in there, and then when the round ends, right, you get the replays, the triple replay or whatever, or just the replay, instant replay to process what just happened. And then you're back into the action after the next round fight, So it's burst of action, lull in action. Even mid-round when you get knockdowns and stuff, right? Or when you both back up from each other and now it's focused on positioning and moving. Samurai Showdown, right? You have quick bursts of like pokes and ting ting, hit the other person's block, then you back up, right? And spacing again. And then it's like, okay, now you go in. I like that flow, But then when it comes to player versus environment, I like the game to be very deep. I like more complexity. Like I said, Genshin bored me, right? And then I played a similar game called Tower Fantasy, which had much more character action style of action. You had like launchers, air combos. It felt more, a perfect dodge which slows time, like in Bayonetta. It had more depth, and so it's more fun to me than Genshin is, right?
If I might psychoanalyze that for a moment, it seems like you enjoy depth very much only when you feel like you aren't forced to take it at any certain pace because you're going against another person. When it's depth in a player versus environment situation, you can plumb those depths at whatever speed you want. So you don't feel rushed, which is why you enjoy the depth a lot more in those situations.
Absolutely. And, you're correct on that, because I know that in my personal life, when I'm being rushed is the times where I have the most trouble keeping my thoughts straight. And because, I've been no stranger. I mean, I've not been shy about mentioning this on in my content, but I have a mild form of Tourette's syndrome, and there are a lot of mental aspects to that make me different than average. And in some ways, when I'm in a hurry, that's when I have the hardest time keeping my thoughts straight, right? Like if I'm rushing to get somewhere, right? Being hurried to get somewhere, that's when I forget things the most. I'll forget my phone, I'll forget my watch, I'll forget something when I'm in a hurry. And my capacity for the mental stack, keeping track of a lot of things at once is just biologically less than most people. And it's not anything I can change. It's something I can only work around. And I've learned to work around it in my life because my Tourette's was diagnosed very young. But still, it is something where I have a limitation in that aspect that most people don't. So when it comes to PvP, it has to be games with those breather moments for me to process, right? And then a little bit less requirements on the mental stack, a little bit less demands.
Yeah.
In PvE, they generally give players more freedom to tackle things at their own pace. Some enemies might force you to oh, this enemy's really aggressive, so you better react fast. Like Tigrex, right? The most annoying enemy in Monster Hunter, because it's always just charging at you. But even then, it's not charging at you so fast you don't have time to react, right? Although sometimes it can catch you off guard if you're too close or you're in the middle of an animation, and that's where the strategy comes in.
I would argue that Nargacuga and Rajang are some of the most annoying for me personally. But yeah, Tigrex is annoying too.
Yeah, so it's it's like that. But in general, it just doesn't feel as oppressive and forcing me to play at whatever certain pace. Like obviously some sections in some games and some enemies will force you to time sections, right? Like, oh, you're in this game, a platformer, right? And you have to get to the end in a certain amount of time because of narrative reasons, right? Like A Hat in Time, right? Remember that episode with the bomb on the train? You have to get to the end in the time limit, right?
Yeah.
So that puts you on those constraints, but it's not so much so that it feels stressful and I just need to do good platforming and I'll make it to the end, right? It's designed in a way that you can succeed as long as you just do what you need to do, right? But when it's player versus player, having a detrimental, or a deficiency in a certain way, if it's a type of game that is designed in a way that, like for me, that's why I don't play tag fighting games, right? Tag assist games, because they were hyper, anime or hyper fighters, right? Because they are designed for people who like that really fast, being forced to play fast, right? And punishing you for playing defensively, like in Guilty Gear. So I just don't play those games because they're clearly not for people of my mentality, right? Or my mental capabilities, even in terms of biology.
Something?
But PvE games, like Monster Hunter Rise, really just gripped me, and I've played it for almost 300 hours, And yeah, and Kyo's right there. Most fighting games have a preferential bias. And yeah, that is true for a lot of games. A lot of people who didn't enjoy Dark Souls enjoyed Elden Ring because that game gave them more freedom to play how they want and at whatever pace they want, right? If you're having trouble with this boss, you can go somewhere else, right? And then come back later. And you can jump. But you can go but you can go somewhere else and come back later if you're struggling with a particular boss. Come back later when you have different gear or you're just in general more powerful, right? Instead of beating your head against the wall until you break through, like in older Dark Souls games. And Elden Ring became Game of the Year and the single most successful Souls-like game. That's an interesting thought, Kyo. Some don't care for Gunvolt or Mighty Number 9 speedrun gameplay. Now, that's an interesting thing because I liked Mighty Number 9, but yeah, it did feel worse than traditional Mega Man because you didn't have as much.
Mighty Number 9 didn't grip me.
Yeah, and
Gunvolt, I played the whole first game Gunvolt through and did the
true ending.
The true ending, yeah.
Yeah.
But something I thought of.
Yeah,
while
I'll
you were
be
talking
honest,
too.
Gunvolt's a game I'm not as good at. I'm pretty good at Mega Man games, but I'm not that good at Gunvolt. I
No,
like it, but I'm not good at it.
no, I'm okay. So I'm gonna say something, and I'm not sure if this is just like on some level. Yeah, I think it's like a general person thing. Maybe some people lean
Yeah.
into this more than most. I'm just talking of my personal experience, but I think one thing that I can tie all of the things that I enjoy in video games are is like the satisfaction of a particular thing, and that doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily always depend on like it can be a deep game or it can be a simple game, right?
Hmm.
Like just the satisfaction of, oh, I did this thing in Pokemon Unite, or I won the game in Pokemon Unite, or the satisfaction in Dragon Ball Fighters of, oh yeah, I landed this sick combo with base Vegeta, you
Hmm.
know? Or even like the times that I've done tabletop based games, the satisfaction of telling a story that I wanted to tell, or like this character that I've created, like coming to different points.
Yeah.
And I also I remembered for a while in the Xbox 360 days, right? I
Hmm.
played so much Transformers Fall of Cybertron, and I'm keeping my eye on Transformers. Well, I'm gonna be on the lookout for when
Reactivate.
Transformers Reactivate
Yeah.
comes around. I haven't seen much of it, but
Yeah.
like Fall of Cybertron wasn't that like complicated of a game.
No.
You just you go around. There are the options for the different weapons in the different classes. You go vehicle mode, run around. But I got so much satisfaction from like the hit and runs as the plane class, the scientist coming in, picking people off, setting up the turrets, chasing the other scientists around, doing aerial dogfights. Like it was so satisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what I'm getting to here basically is regarding depth. In order for an individual, on the individual level, the right amount of depth for someone to have fun is whatever amount of depth makes the game feel satisfying but not overwhelming. For most people.
Yeah.
Some people like
that's a
overcoming
pretty
the overwhelming challenge, but generally speaking, if it's just enough depth that it's satisfying to succeed, just challenging enough that you have to try a little bit, but not so much that it's like overwhelming and discouraging, right? And that's why different people have different levels of preference in depth in games.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's games like what people would consider rage games, like Bennett fought Getting Over It and Jump King and Pogo Stuck, like that. Some people just really enjoy like the satisfaction of winning against it, and I think that's in a similar vein as Soulsborne games in a way, where
And to some extent, fighting game players too.
Is that it's difficult and you succeed over it.
Yeah, succeeding over the insanely high difficult and stuff, and that really is dependent on your personality. Some people, they have the personality for that. Other people, they just don't, right?
Yeah.
And for some people, it's just like it's something that's that tough and like just teeth grindingly difficult. They just feel like it's a waste of their time, right?
Yeah, some people want to challenge themselves, and some people want to feel powerful.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's part of why the fighting game genre is so polarizing. Not only among people who aren't already existing fans, but also even within the fighting game fandom, is because some people want to have that like feel powerful, but it's a player versus player thing, so it always comes at the detriment of the person who's not feeling powerful.
It's not like they're never going to be a power fantasy game unless you are that good at the game. You're not going to have that power fantasy.
Yeah, but some people want that.
They got Goichi or something like that.
Yeah, but some people want that in a fighting game, which results in the long, flashy, combos that take away interaction from another player.
That actually reminds me of the types of people that I think you've told me about before. People who complain about skill-based matchmaking in shooters because they want like clips and stuff.
Yeah.
That's a weird case where people seem to want that power fantasy, or at least the appearance of that power fantasy.
They want to be able to pub stomp people. Yeah. They want to pub stomp other players because it feeds their ego, It feeds
Yeah,
their ego.
exactly. If you want power fantasy, then you shouldn't be playing fighting games. Look at PvE, and like we already talked about it, but character action games.
Yeah.
That's the epitome of power fantasy.
Yeah, because the character action games, they embody that. When you get good at a character action game, you are untouchable, even though the enemies are not weak. Not all the enemies are weak, like especially not bosses, right? But when you're good at them, good enough at them, you are untouchable. You get to feel just insanely powerful.
Yeah,
but that's the reward for skill, right? People want that, though.
Games like God of War, even it's not the kind of game that we play, but you can't deny the spectacle of games like that. You're taking down giants, and you're just one angry man.
Yeah, but the problem is when people want that in a player versus player, a competitive game, because then it's always going to come at the detriment of the person on the receiving end.
Yeah.
And and unfortunately, a lot of fighting games over the last, I would say, decade or 15 years kind of went in that direction.
Bit of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that's definitely truly you don't really know what you want, because what you think you want is not exactly what's best for you or what's best for the genre, but it's what people want.
I guess it's a certain personality type, because like they want to win, but they also want another person to lose.
It's ego. That's literally just ego, man.
I think some people in fighting games really are like that, and you see the egotists. You see some of the top players will be those kind of egotists. Not all of them, obviously.
No, not all.
A lot of top players need that kind of, similar to
not
just
sports, not just fighting games, but like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, shooters, PvP in general.
It's similar to
card
a
games.
lot of sport where athletes, right? A lot of them need that ego that I'm the best. I'm going to show everyone that I'm the best. Y'all are going to lose because you're going against me. It's that kind of get that Mike Tyson. I'm unstoppable. I'm impregnable. You can't stop my you can't get through my defense.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, it's funny because when I started doing that, I thought of Punk.
Punk, he basically is the Mike Tyson of the fighting game community, actually, or the Street Fighter community, anyway. No, you're not wrong there. But yeah, no, that is pretty interesting thought there. And then I just want to go over here what Keo said. You just gotta watch what you sign up for, and then that's why maybe we'll tie this into another episode we'll do again. Maybe not next month, but the one after, but different genres, right? Because different genres do have their kind of target audiences, right? And types of people that they generally want to appeal to at their core, and then they can fine tune it to try and bring in more new people of different types.
And I think we've brought that up in some of our left fields before, because there's a bit of cross pollination between these topics, and we a lot of the time tend to bring up the fact that fighting games are a lot more volatile in relation to how these aspects affect them than PvE and various things like that. But Muso games have that power fantasy too. Like we talked about earlier.
Yep. So it's sometimes sitting down and playing something where you're powerful and it's not too complex for you to be that powerful. That has its everything has its audience, right?
The thing about Dynasty Warriors games, though, for me, that mowing enemies down, it doesn't quite feel earned. But I'm thinking about it is a lot of the time to me, you just kind of do it. But I think of Sonic Frontiers, where I just mowed through recently the boss rushes, because I'm so high level, got all the skills and stuff, but I wasn't like that from the start of the game, so it felt earned. I think the feeling of earning it also adds to it.
The RPG mechanics, like I mentioned earlier, they kind of give you that feeling of becoming more powerful with time.
And progression, progression like we talked about in character action games.
Yep.
You feel like you've earned it because you got from a lower point to a higher point. Whereas Dynasty, what I've played of Dynasty Warriors games, which actually most of it was Dynasty Warriors Gundam, personally.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like there was as much progression. You kind of were already mowing down all the small troops from the beginning.
And
it
that
just takes
sounds
a little bit more skill to beat the bosses.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like what Kyo says here in chat. He cares about getting better, and so for games that don't have the in-game progression, the skill progression of the player is how you earn that power, right? And then character action games, they do give that to you as well, because just leveling up isn't alone enough to make you have that power fantasy. You have to get good as a player too at using the mechanics. And then fighting games or competitive games in general is that it's doing that, but then succeeding over other players, right? Prevailing over other players is how you get that feeling of like, this is a player I just couldn't beat before. He's my target, and then I got better. I got good enough to beat him.
I think Theo might have missed what I said during like an ad or something, but yeah, I basically said that where in the Muso games, I didn't really feel like I earned as much the mowing enemies down, like because there wasn't really much challenge, whereas like I got to the point in Sonic Frontiers where I was using like the crazy cyber sonic wind, I forget what the special is called in the game, to mow down enemies in the boss rush. But like I feel like I earned that to do the speed run, because I went through the points before where I wasn't that strong.
Yeah, so the power ramping of playing through the story then allowed you to feel like that power was earned in the challenge modes when you were able to get good enough to really conquer those.
Small note, there's also like the occasional game that like RPG game, like a Tales game or whatever. I forget which game it was, but there was one where when you get to a certain level, like when you run into enemies on the overworld.
Oh yeah, you just auto defeat them.
The level below you, you just defeat them immediately.
Yeah, no, I get you there. Yep. So another reason I wanted to bring up this topic, and I'm just going to mention it very briefly because we're nearing the end of our time.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop bringing it to the left field.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Is Street Fighter 6 is coming out soon, in like just under 2 months, and that game is, it's not the craziest game like your, anime Air Dasher type games or tag games, but the depth comes from the drive system and how you engage with those mechanics. So I'm very interested to see how that's going forward, and that was part of what kind of inspired us to think about this type, or it's related, tangentially related to us with that. So I'm definitely interested to see how this turns out with the drive gauge, because it's all tied to 1 meter. It's not too much to keep track of, but it depends on how each thing feels. Yeah.
For when it comes out.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on to see how that goes and how they balance depth with approachability. So far, it looks like they're doing a good job with it from everything I've seen so far. So definitely looking forward to seeing how that goes. And then Mega Man Battle Network Collection just recently came out, and that game, its depth does not come from the execution as much. The between choosing your chips, it's all real time, so you do have to use every battle chip right. So there is some execution there, but the execution mechanically is just press the button to use the chip. It's more about when and how, right? The timing and the positioning rather than the mechanical execution. But there's a lot of combos you can do in that game and all sorts of crazy stuff you could do. It comes more from a knowledge standpoint. So, definitely some stuff to look out for. I'll get the Battle Network Collection eventually. I've heard the Switch version is the only version that has like the most people playing online. Apparently the PC version's online play is kind of dry. And then probably because you can already play via, the rollback emulators. So Switch version is the one to get it on. And then Street Fighter 6 is coming out with crossplay. So that's going to be it for us today. We try to keep our episodes around or under 2 hours. The discussion part, that is, not the whole stream itself. So we're pretty much right at that point. So Sai, you want to plug your stuff?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have a Twitter. I don't tweet much, but it's there. It's my username, SaiPrime, SAI, and the word prime. I have a Twitch, which I haven't been doing much on it yet, but I want to start doing stuff. And when I start doing things on YouTube, then I will say what that is, but I don't have one set up. So
okay. So it's just SaiPrime on all platforms pretty much. And you might have some stuff coming in the future for Twitch when you start doing stuff consistently. So you've got some ideas. You're putting some stuff into motion.
I'm working on things.
I know some of these things, but I'm not gonna reveal. But just know that there's some stuff coming for Sai here. And then for me, s_factor_sam, as you can see in the channel names on all the platforms you can watch or listen to this on. Podcast platforms, YouTube, Twitch, all of that. And then I've got more stuff coming up. Like we said, next podcast episode, we'll have a guest member on there with us. And then I've got some collaborative material coming up too, very soon actually. So keep an eye out for that, particularly on YouTube is where the collaborative material is going to be. And then what else? I mean, we're just going to keep things rolling with the podcast and the YouTube content especially, and then going to try to have the weekly streams. So this is where the end of our audio only portion is going to be for all those platforms. Thank you everyone who came out and chatted. Thanks Kyo for chiming in on discussions especially. Maybe we'll do more live episodes in the future. We're just trying some stuff out for now, seeing how it goes. So maybe when it's just me and Sai, we'll always do it live. Maybe that's how we'll do that, so we can have chat involved. I think I kind of like that idea. So we'll discuss that in the background and update everyone on social medias and stuff. Okay, so that's the end of this episode of CounterPick New Perspectives. Those who are still here, don't go anywhere. I'm probably going to switch over to something else for a little bit, just for some stream fun. But for the podcast, that's it. Have a great one, everyone.
Later.